Hi and welcome to Terry Talks Movies. This time around I've got a bit of a listicle, but it's an enormous one. And it's about Hollywood and Hollywood movies, as you know from the title and the thumbnail. I've got a bit of admin to share which amuses the hell out of me. At the end of the last video I said that two of the commenters would be getting Blu-rays if they told me that they were able to play Region 2 Blu-rays. And guess what? Not many people watch the video to the end of the video, and so they missed out on that opportunity. The two people have been contacted, and thank them very much for the comments that they left and the fact that they paid attention to the end of the video. This video, there won't be a giveaway at the end of it, but keep your eyes open in future and stick around to the end of the video, or even just scrub to the end of the video, though I prefer you did the former, because there will be a few more giveaways. Umbrella still left me some stuff which I can give away and which I should give away. I'm going to be dropping those notifications into the videos toward the end of the videos to kind of encourage people to stick around. Hollywood movies about Hollywood, or even just movies about Hollywood, something that fascinates me endlessly. There's a little shiver you get about finding out hidden knowledge about Hollywood. There's the romantic clay aspect of, is this person supposed to be that person in real life? Hollywood movies about Hollywood and movies about Hollywood in general are, for me, really fascinating. And so, because Damien Chazelle's movie Babylon is about to come out, which is about Hollywood at the transition between the silent and the sound era, it seemed a good opportunity to talk about a whole bunch of movies about Hollywood that I think you should watch. And there are a lot of them. I think there are about 28, if I'm correct. So get your pen and paper ready. So let's get started. This one was really popular a dozen years ago. This movie was the flavor of the month. It was a flash in the pan. It was a brilliant moment for the filmmakers. But nobody's talked about it since, and that's the interesting thing. There's a kind of attention horizon that movies in particular go past, and then people don't think about them again until they do. And in 2011, the movie The Artist, directed by Michel Hazanavicius and starring Jean Dujardin and Berenice Bejo, was enormously popular. It won Oscars. It was a silent movie made in the 21st century about making movies and about an actor falling in love with a young woman. And that's kind of interesting. I think it's probably worth revisiting now. I'll put it onto my rewatch list, but nobody really talks about it anymore. A silent black and white movie made in the 21st century was a bold move. And the fact that it did so incredibly well surprised a lot of people in Hollywood, because this is like 2011. People were into the MCU and into superhero movies, and suddenly this thing comes along, which is unashamedly nostalgic and yet modern at the same time. Some people complained about it, some people really liked it. I kind of liked it when I watched it. I've always been a fan of Jean Dujardin as far back as Brice de Nice and the early OSS 77 movies, though the third one, which was only made a couple of years ago, is a bit of a letdown. But yeah, The Artist is definitely about Hollywood, made from an outsider's viewpoint because the filmmakers were French, and yet it has something valid to say about Hollywood and the Hollywood system. Then we get to two of my favourite ones. I've talked about these ones enormously on the channel. The Bad and the Beautiful from 1952, directed by Vincente Minnelli, starring Kirk Douglas. And 2 Weeks in Another Town, made in 1962, directed by Vincente Minnelli and starring Kirk Douglas. The first one's about Hollywood in Hollywood. The second one's about the Hollywood diaspora, where a whole bunch of people who were no longer part of the studio system because they didn't have contracts went and made movies in Europe, and how that affected the filmmaking process and how that affected the creative people who make movies. Both of them are great fun to watch. Neither of them is particularly a deep and scathing condemnation of Hollywood or anything like that. They're dramas, and they kind of verge on being melodramas as well. But the second one, 2 Weeks in Another Town, really sucks me in because there's a redemption arc there that I really like in film. So number 4 on the list, we've got Barton Fink from 1991. Directed by the Coen brothers, starring John Turturro as the titular character, a New York playwright, and is seduced into going to Hollywood and writing the script for a wrestling movie starring Wallace Beery. Of course, we've got John Goodman playing a kind of apocalyptic salesman in this one. I think I'm going to have to revisit Barton Fink, but I remember it being a lot of fun and setting up its time and place really well. It has that kind of feel that it actually is taking place at the time it says it's taking place, rather than having a veneer of modernity about it. And Zatura has a unique look in this one, and John Goodman commits to the role in an enormous way. And for me, it's one of the top 2 or 3 John Goodman roles, along with his Walter in The Big Lebowski and a few other things. But yeah, Barton Fink, I think, is one I'm going to revisit because I know I've got the disc. Going back and rewatching it might be a lot of fun. I think I'll get more out of it now than I did at the time it came out. Number 5 on the list is a searing condemnation of the Hollywood studio system. Directed by Robert Aldrich in 1955, starring Jack Palance, Ida Lupino and Rod Steiger as the most monstrous movie producer in movie history, The Big Knife is one you've got to see. It's in beautiful black and white. It's based on a stage play, and it really does peel the skin off the Hollywood system. In it, Jack Palance is playing kind of heartthrob movie actor called Charlie Castle, who used to be a little bit lefty, but he kind of backed off on that because of the House Un-American Activities Committee. His wife's played by Ida Lupino, and there is a monstrous movie producer called Stanley Schreiner Hoff, played by Rod Steiger.
Who are you? You some kind of special aristocracy because the female public wants to make love with you?
Who is trying to convince him to renew his contract with the studio. Charlie Castle doesn't want to do that. He wants to go his own way, be an independent film actor. When the screws are tightened by Steiger's character and also by his sidekick, played by Wendell Corey, things get incredibly tough and difficult and heartbreakingly tragic for Charlie Castle. It's a movie you've got to see. The ending still has impact. Jack Palance has probably never been better in a movie than in this one. So that then brings me to one that I'm kind of ambivalent about because of the star. 1976, directed by Martin Ritt, The Front, where Woody Allen plays an ordinary guy who ends up being a front for blacklisted writers during the House Un-American Activities Committee. His name goes onto the scripts, even though a whole bunch of other better people write the scripts, but they're unable to use their own names because of that blacklisting. And a lot of the actors in this one, including Zero Mostel, who's in there in a really poignant role, are people who were actually blacklisted at the time. It was made in 1976, about 20 odd years after the blacklistings. And it works. It really does punch hard and shows the monstrousness of blacklisting people for their progressive political opinions. Then we go to Nicholas Ray in 1950 for In a Lonely Place. One of the best later roles that Humphrey Bogart did, along with Gloria Graham in it. He's playing a very kind of troubled screenwriter in Hollywood who's accused of a murder that he didn't commit.
Did you see Mr. Steele last night?
Yes, as I came home, I saw him going to his apartment with a girl.
That girl was murdered between 1 and 2 o'clock this morning.
But there's a lot of things about his character in this one which is incredibly troubling. And he is an incredibly flawed character. Falls in love with a woman who lives in the same apartment complex as him, played by Gloria Graham. And yeah, it's a character piece as much as it is a piece about Hollywood. I can rewatch this one because I think that Bogart, apart from the big roles in Casablanca and African Queen and The Maltese Falcon, he was often good in smaller movies like this and give us intelligent and intellectual roles. And he's in another movie that I'm going to talk about on this list, which I appreciate a lot, from around the same time, a few years after this one, which shows his skill at playing kind of not wise guy characters, but wise people. And in A Lonely Place, he doesn't play a wise person, but the way he plays it is very intelligent, very acute. And working with Nicholas Ray brought out the best in him. Then we move on to an adaptation of a James Ellroy novel, LA Confidential, 1997, directed by Curtis Hanson, starring Guy Pearce, Kevin Spacey, Russell Crowe, Kim Basinger, set in the 1950s, showing the corruption of not only the Hollywood studio system, but also the Los Angeles police force at the time when the Hollywood studio system was at its peak. It's it's slimy, it's sleazy, it's brilliant. Spacey, of course, is now an incredibly problematic person, and I'm not going to try to defend him in any way. Good actor, shit human being. The other actors, Guy Pearce and Russell Crowe, this was their really big introduction to Hollywood and their breakthrough roles. And the production values in this, setting up 1950s Hollywood, are really good. And the supporting cast is good too. James Cromwell, amongst other people. You've really got to rewatch this one, I think, while still getting a slight taste of acid in the back of your throat every time Kevin Spacey's on screen. Then there's a small light comedy by Albert Brooks from 1999 called The Muse, which everybody's forgotten about now. It stars Albert Brooks, and it stars Sharon Stone as a woman who is a muse for creative people in Hollywood and kind of inspires them and sparks fire to their ideas. And it's about the creative process as much as anything. It's got that wonderful, light, comedic Albert Brooks touch, but it is a lot of fun. In some ways, it reminds me of One Touch of Venus, the movie from the 1940s starring Ava Gardner and Robert Walker, where she's playing the goddess Venus. And it's got that kind of whimsical touch, which I think too few movies in our modern times have. Whimsy is something that movies seem to have lost, at least in adult films, not like in films for grown-ups, not adult films. There are whimsical movies for kids, but movies for adults that are whimsical are a little bit rare these days, and I kind of miss it. Then we've got number 10 is The Player, Robert Altman, with Tim Robbins, Greta Scacchi and Fred Ward. Got that beautiful long tracking shot at the start. I always like a movie that starts with a wonderful long tracking shot. About a Hollywood producer called Griffith Mills who kills a screenwriter and is trying to get away with it. A lot of fun. It gives us a lot of the industrial aspect of Hollywood filmmaking and the deal making and the bullshit. It's got an enormously large cast. Dean Stockwell's in there. Pretty much everybody who's anybody at the time is in there, some of whom are playing themselves. But The Player does have that. But The Player really does deliver well. Based on a novel by Michael Tolkien, which I've got a copy of up here somewhere. Yep, there it is. And I think this one might be worth a revisit too. I should do a season for myself of Hollywood movies about Hollywood, because researching this video, I've thought, I've got to rewatch that one. I've got to rewatch that one. I've got to rewatch that one. So many great movies about Hollywood, and it's an endlessly fascinating thing because it's a microcosm of the larger world in so many ways. Next one's a really popular movie from 1952, which everybody loves, but I'm kind of, I like it, but I don't really love it. Singin In The Rain, which was directed by Stanley Donen and Gene Kelly, starring Gene Kelly, Donald O'Connor, Debbie Reynolds, about that transition between silent movies and sound. It's a musical. It's got some of the best dance sequences and song sequences in cinema, but for me it seemed a little bit less than wonderful, and I'm not quite sure why. It's covering a lot of the same ground that Damien Chazelle's Babylon does, but Chazelle apparently, I haven't seen the movie yet, takes a very different tack on it. But the make 'em laugh thing is there, the Moses supposes and scenes, and the over-the-top exuberance is a lot of fun. But for me, I'm not sure what it is, but I don't love it as much as many other people do. Next one's a bit of a deep cut from 2000. A movie directed and written by David Mamet called State and Maine. It's got Philip Seymour Hoffman, it's got Rebecca Pidgeon, William H. Macy, Alec Baldwin, and it's about a Hollywood production that turns up in a small town and basically takes over the town in so many ways to make a film called The Red Mill. And the movie people get involved with the local people. The local people, some of them are happy about the movie people being there. Some are pissed off. It's got that sharp David Mamet dialogue. Philip Seymour Hoffman is really good in it, and Rebecca Pidgeon's really good in it. And it's got so many quotable bits. Again, it's done on a small scale. It's not an enormously vast movie. It has a kind of light touch and a fun to it that you don't normally see in the movies of David Mamet. It's one that I really like. I think that Hoffman giving us another one of those characters where it's not like other Philip Seymour Hoffman roles. He's such a loss to film. I think that playing older characters, as he started to do movies like The Master, he would have been good for another 20 or 30 years in cinema had he not, unfortunately, died of his addiction. Then we got The Stunt Man from 1980, directed by Richard Rush, starring Peter O'Toole, Steve Railsback, and Barbara Hershey. The Stunt Man is great because it plays with reality and plays with the way that the audience perceives reality, and it has a viewpoint character in the fugitive who becomes a stuntman under the influence of a messianic director played by Peter O'Toole. And we as the audience, along with the protagonist, don't quite know what's real and what's not real. He comes in as an outsider, as a viewpoint person, and he is a troubled and manic and fearful person coming into this insanity of a Hollywood location in a weird way. The Stuntman, I think, is one of those movies that should be seen more than it is. At the time it came out, it was very popular. I remember talking about it with any number of people and talking about that way that it plays with reality. And it's one that should be rewatched and shouldn't be forgotten. Sullivan's Travels, 1941. Preston Sturges. I've got a Preston Sturges biography here, which I'm going to go grab now. I love this biography of Preston Sturges because it's got the best title. Between Flops, a biography of Preston Sturges. I haven't read it all yet, but I'll intend to. And it's by James Curtis. And yeah, Sullivan's Travels great. It's a Hollywood screenwriter played by Joel McCrea decides to go and find the real America. He wants to make a movie called Brother, Where Art Thou? And he goes to try to find the real America. He meets a hobo played by Veronica Lake. And he also ends up being mistaken for somebody else and put into a rural chain gang. And he has an epiphany about the nature of cinema. He wants to make serious, important films. And he has an epiphany about the nature of cinema and what cinema means to real people who aren't part of the industry. It's a beautiful film. It's wonderfully whimsical. It's wise. And it's one that you should have in your collection if you collect physical media. And if you don't collect physical media, try to find a streaming service that has a copy of Sullivan's Travels on it. It's a precious movie. I think it may well have got a Criterion release. In fact, I'm sure it has. Again, this is one I've got to rewatch. There's so many I want to rewatch. So many new movies I want to see that I haven't seen before. So the struggle is real. Then we've got a couple of movies by Blake Edwards, which I like. They're not the best movies about Hollywood, but they're movies of which I have a fondness. The first one is Sunset from 1988 with Bruce Willis and James Garner, where Bruce Willis plays Tom Mix, the cowboy movie star, and James Garner plays Wyatt Earp, who comes in as a consultant for a Tom Mix movie. And they get involved in some shenanigans and some murders. And there is a guy who's supposed to be Charlie Chaplin, played by Malcolm McDowell, who is a sociopath, basically, and who is very much involved in the goings-on. And the movie evokes 1920s Hollywood in a slightly glossy way, but in an interesting way as well. And Malcolm McDowell is dead creepy in this one, whereas Bruce Willis and James Garner have a nice chemistry about them, playing two iconic characters in a very fictionalized environment. Now, with this list, I'm not doing biopics or anything like that about Hollywood, but the fictionalized version of Tom Mix and of Wyatt Earp make this one not a biopic of those characters, but more a murder mystery with those characters as characters. Next one I've got is Sunset Boulevard, 1950, Billy Wilder, William Holden, Gloria Swanson. There's nothing not to love about this movie. It's got a posthumous protagonist doing a voiceover. It's showing the dark side of faded Hollywood careers and how having been very famous leads to an enormous letdown and a real kind of melancholy and a sadness in the characters who at one stage were enormously popular and lauded almost like demigods, and whose careers then took a drop and things went in a strange direction. And it's also about the chances, the people who want to be part of the insiders, who haven't quite made it and end up doing humiliating things to try to at least keep their foot in the door of Hollywood. Important film. We can forget the fact that Andrew Lloyd Webber did a musical about Sunset Boulevard because I didn't like it. But going back to the original is always the best thing. This has that scathing Billy Wilder dialogue and the absurdity of things like a chimpanzee's funeral. It's a film noir as much as it is a film about Hollywood, and it's brilliant. From there I go forward to 2014 and a David Cronenberg movie about Hollywood, Maps to the Stars, with Julianne Moore, John Cusack, Robert Pattinson. It's written by a very fine screenwriter called Bruce Wagner, who also writes really good novels. And Bruce Wagner is also the guy who wrote Wild Palms, the TV miniseries from the 1990s that I've talked about on the channel before. Yeah, this one's kind of scathing about Hollywood. It's very kind of insightful because Bruce Wagner has been in Hollywood for a number of decades, and it tends to be a forgotten Cronenberg movie because it's very atypical of his work. Nonetheless, it does have certain Cronenbergian touches, and it has some really good acting in it. Robert Pattinson is very good. Julianne Moore is brilliant in it. Again, another one I should revisit soon because I'm feeling really like I've got to watch a lot of movies about Hollywood. Now, I'm going to make this a two-parter because this video is going a little bit long already. So that's it for this time around. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, like, subscribe, leave a comment. You can also support the channel by going to patreon.com/paleocinema. Going to be back in a few days for the second half of this. I'm really looking forward to talking more about these movies, about movies. And in the meantime, look after yourself. Watch some good movies, watch some bad movies. Watch a few Hollywood movies about Hollywood. And I'll catch you next time.